right. Part two of just continuing with the consolidation, and part two of looking at the subsection of Chairman Mao. Okay, so now we're going to be looking into some of the more rougher history, right? It's already been pretty rough, but there is a moment known as the Great Terror. In the early years, the CCP would easily target the enemy. Sorry, easily was able to identify the enemy and target them because of this old household registration system that existed before Mao even came in. This registration system was actually implemented by Chiang, if I remember correctly, and basically they would label those who were loyal to the nationalist as good, bad, middle, or bad, depending on how loyal you were. So they just kind of like transferred that system and placed it for the communists, right? For Mao. Um, this kind of turned people into snitches almost, right? People were kind of snitching on each other, informing. Um, so anybody who was kind of just bad talking the system, um, didn't show allegiance or dedication, or was trying to sabotage it, um, they had those labels placed on them, right? Additionally to that, the vulnerable class, the beggars, the pickpockets, and the prostitutes, were seen as a drain of resources. Your book doesn't really go into much details as to what happens to them, but eventually a system is put in place to kind of, eliminate that, not eliminate them for the most part. What I'm saying is eliminate what leads to that, right? So what leads to poverty, what leads to people having to pickpocket, what leads to people having to prostitute themselves. And so it's kind of like attacking the root. But that comes eventually. So you also see labor camps as well being placed in China. So, these camps were used as a reform through labor for people who were resistant to this, or people who had committed crimes, even in the past, even before, or even during. And so you had about 2 million people that were being sent here. A lot of them were political prisoners. So if you were still loyal to the old government and trying to sabotage the new government, this is where you were sent. And if you reformed yourself, and it's kind of like you changed, your way of thinking, then you'd be accepted back. But the conditions were harsher, and overall, you had about 10 million people in these camps through China at any given time while Mao was in power. Not all at once, but through spreading time, right? Next one. So when looking at mass killings and executions, it kind of reminds me of what Castro did with the old people who had been in charge and found guilty of crimes. So the soldiers that belonged to Batista, who had been found guilty of raping, killing, stealing, all that stuff. It's kind of like, okay, we're going to take care of them and do executions, right? And so kind of you see something similar in China as well. So the most dangerous enemies from that had been found guilty in the past of hurting the communities and doing just horrible things, or even during this time, trying to sabotage or just, kill or whatever, were imprisoned and sometimes quietly executed or publicly humiliated, interrogated, and all. So you can see right here, you see that public humiliation happening in that picture. A lot of people were behind it because this is the first time they see accountability for some of these people who had never been accountable for some of the things that they had done in the past. So you start to see counter-revolutionaries, people who are purposely trying to reverse things or sabotage the revolution, people who were spying either for the United States or for, whatever, right? Or for, the old government, the one that's located in Taiwan. People who were gang members dealing drugs, kind of opioids, all those things that were kind of crippling the communities with drug addiction, criminal bosses, money laundering, smuggling, all of those things. All those people were interrogated. Some, if you were found guilty of harsh, crimes, you would have a harsh punishment. Violent gangs, turned in, Mao targeted them too, as well, with the killing campaign of having thousands of them were targeted and eliminated. And Mao kind of wanted quotas. Basically, it's kind of like saying, like, well, we need to have this many people who belong to these groups that we know exist, and I want them gone. Okay, and soldiers were eager. People who belonged to the PLA were eager to do this because they were very loyal to Mao. Okay, next one. Land reform. Common theme in Nasir, Castro, and now Mao. Okay, so you have three options of comparison. You pick two out of the three for the future. So land was taken away from landlords and given to the peasants who had worked the land, right? And so you have about 2 to 3 million landlords who were guilty of exploiting peasants and were executed. So if you were basically conducting borderline slave labor, you were targeted and you were made to pay for your crimes, as you can see in those pictures as well, put into display with, I have no idea what those signs say, but I got it from a website that basically was showing that. But peasants were organized into teams who helped one another out and shared their tools and livestock, so everybody's just kind of working together. Villagers were also locked into land cooperatives, just again working together as a community. But this also made it easier for the state to come in and take some grain to feed soldiers, to feed other people in China that weren't able to do this. But unfortunately, this was not very well planned because it did end up causing a famine. Because sometimes they'd take a little too much. It's not like they were hoarding it for themselves. Do not think that. It's more of distribution, right? It just didn't work out in the way that they needed to. Last one. So in 1949, there had been about 10 political parties, but the political purge removed them, and they were labeled as imperialist or counter-revolutionaries. And you have to understand why that happened. You had political parties that were very loyal to keeping the West, the British or even the United States, and serving the best interest of those countries. You had parties that wanted to go back to the old government, right? The one that couldn't really do anything, or the one that was very oppressive, right? And so the idea of we had to get rid of these parties because as long as we have them, they're going to be a threat to bringing back that old system. So by 1952, the CCP was the only party allowed to exist. The CCP claimed that authority rested within the people and that the government was only there to serve them. So this is how authority is transferred, right? Authority is transferred from the top, and now the people have that authority themselves. Whether you believe that to be true or not, that's a separate debate. But the party officials were accountable to the people at a local level, to the places that they represented. But the reality is, though, it was kind of hard to get elected into office if you were seen. Sorry, I had the hiccups. If you were seen as critical of Mao. So despite this claim of authority only resting in the hands of the people, you have to understand that also, in addition to that, it also rested in the hands of the National People's Congress, and they were there to basically, only there to approve their decisions. Mao was chairman of this party and this system, and president of the PRC until 1959. In 1954, the constitution was put into place, in which China would follow, appointments of judges, citizens having equal rights in public trials, equality before law was given to all. The reality is, though, early on, this was not really necessarily followed because, again, the country's pretty unstable. But it was towards the end as time progressed, and even more after Mao's death. But that is it for today. See you later.